Now we're going to talk about you and your childhood a bit. You were born in Brooklyn. Did you grow up there?
I lived in Brooklyn till I was 19 years old.
Where in Brooklyn were you living?
Till I was 8 in Bed-Stuy, and then in Bensonhurst from 8 to 19.
And what was your home like? Was it an apartment or a house?
My parents owned, when they moved to Bensonhurst, they owned a 4-family house. When they lived in Bed-Stuy, we lived in a 2-family home where they were renting an apartment.
Where did you go to school?
I went to PS 101 and then New Utrecht High School and then Queens College.
When you were growing up, did you have any Jewish education?
Yeah, I went to a Hebrew school academy till 4th grade, and then I went into public school and went to Hebrew school after.
Did you have a bat mitzvah?
No.
In those days, the girls didn't usually have that, but yet you attended after school Hebrew school until what age?
I'd say probably 12 or 13. Yeah.
When you were living there, did you have friends in the neighborhood? What were the other kinds of people like who were living near you?
Many immigrants, and so I was friends with many children of immigrants who had gone through similar situations as my parents.
What is your earliest memory of your parents?
It goes back a long way. I think that's hard to say. I don't know if I can answer that.
Well, you mentioned that there were other families where the parents had gone through the Holocaust as well. How did you know that?
Oh, my earliest memory of them as Holocaust survivors. Okay. To be that specific, I can't say, but I knew at a pretty young age, maybe 4 or 5, that my parents were not from the United States, that they had experienced something, though what it was they didn't tell me. So I would say that far back at 4 or 5, recognition that my parents were not American. They didn't speak English in the house. They spoke it outside, but in the house they spoke Yiddish. My first speaking language was Yiddish.
And yet you found that the people outside the house in the neighborhood, you were not different from them because they were very similar, you said.
Right.
How would you know that, say, a friend's parents had gone through the same thing?
Probably in a very practical way that, my mother would speak Yiddish with these people when we got together as kids, There were also neighborhood kids, like 1 or 2 I remember being friendly with, and this is prior to being 5 and going to school, where she spoke English to those parents. So I think, that on that level, subconsciously, I think I understood the difference.
Right. Do you recall when you were a child whether your parents had nightmares at all?
I know my father had nightmares, but I don't recall that as a young child. I know that as a teenager.
That's when you became aware
of that.
Right. Now you mentioned your mother's brother had survived. Did he live near you?
Yeah, my mother had 2 brothers that survived. Her older brother, my Uncle Sam, lived originally in Bed-Stuy, or, actually, I don't quite remember this, but before the apartment I remember well, I know that my mother came to the United States after her brother, several years after her brother, and they lived near each other, and then, and my father and uncle were in business together.
So you knew your one uncle very well?
Both uncles very well. My mother's younger brother went to Australia, went to Italy and then Australia, and then when I was 7 he came to the United States.
Did your father have any extended family that either had lived in America or had survived the war?
No, all of my father's siblings were killed in the war. There were 8 children, they were all killed, and his parents.
Were you or your brothers named after any of the relatives who died?
Yes, we all were.
So who were you named after?
Okay, so my Hebrew name is Machla Hendel, which translates to Marilyn Helen, which is Machla Marilyn was my mother's mother, and Hendel was my father's mother. My older brother Mark is Moshe Yitzchak, which is Mark or Moshe was my father's name, and Yitzchak was my mother's father's name. My younger brother Alan was named after one of my mother's brothers who had died.
So all of you were carrying the memory of family.
Yes, yes.
When did you know, or do you have any idea when you realized that you all were named after people who had died?
I think it feels like I always knew that. Knew how they died came later, but being named after a grandparent who had died, I think that didn't affect me in any particular way.
Did you have any feelings about not having grandparents at all?
Not till my own parents became grandparents, because at that point I understood the role of a grandparent in a child's life.
How did your parents support the family?
After the war, my father started in Germany in the fabric business. And my uncle came here, and he started working, I guess what you call a sweatshop today, sewing slipcovers. So when my father came, he started in that same factory that my uncle was in. And they eventually, and I was pretty young, I must have been 4 or 5, opened a fabric shop in Brooklyn where they made slipcovers for furniture. So I don't ever remember feeling poor or anything like that. I always felt I could have what I asked for or wanted within reason.
Did your mother stay home, take care of the children?
Yes.
So she didn't have to work?
No, she didn't have to work. She stayed home and took care of us, yeah. Yeah.
Was your father able to get home in time for say, dinner time?
No. He and both my uncles, because eventually my mother's younger brother came and went into business with them. So they went from having a slipcover store to opening a small furniture shop to a larger furniture store, and he worked late hours. So, no. So maybe Sunday till laws changed about businesses.
Now, your 2 uncles, did they have children?
My Uncle Sam had a daughter, and my other Uncle Gary had 3 children. So yes,
So
he married an American woman in the United States.
Were you close with your cousins?
There's at least a 10-year age difference. So I was actually very close to my Uncle Gary's children, even though there was that age difference, in the sense of babysitting for them, and my mother. He relied on my mother a lot. Mm. So my other uncle, it wasn't quite the same closeness.
How did your parents observe Judaism in your home? Aside, and we know they sent you all to Hebrew school, but how did they keep religion in your home?
I grew up in a kosher home. My father would cover his head for every meal. They went to temple when they could. When my younger brother was 10, which would make me older, or when actually, the way I see it, I may be intellectualizing this, rules changed about keeping businesses opened on Sunday. My father had someone in the business on Saturday so he could observe the Sabbath. So actually my younger brother, Alan, who's 10 years younger, had a much more traditional Jewish upbringing in the sense of observing the Sabbath. But, I clearly knew, my Jewish heritage and tradition. I never questioned that.
Did you or your family attend a synagogue?
Yes, they always did. I guess an Orthodox one when I was young, living in Brooklyn, in terms of men and women sat separately. When they moved to Queens, they attended a conservative temple.
Were your brothers bar mitzvahed?
Both my brothers were bar mitzvahed, and my older brother went to a yeshiva, Hebrew day school, till the middle of high school when he didn't want to go anymore, so he went to go. And my younger brother went to yeshiva through high school.
Yet you didn't.
Yet I didn't. Supposedly, I wasn't a very good student, so around the 4th grade, my mother thought maybe I was having too much trouble with both English and Hebrew, so the smart move would be to move me to a public school where I didn't have 2 languages to deal with, or, that is longer day in school.
Now, you mentioned that in the your local neighborhood, there were other immigrant families, other parents who spoke Yiddish,
Right.
probably other children of survivors. Was that the same in your elementary school? Was it a very local elementary school with mostly the immigrant children?
By that point they had moved to Bensonhurst, and it was a local public school, so there was a mixture. And kids on the block that I was friendly with, because you were friendly with kids on the block at that time, it was a mixture.
So you weren't surrounded by as many immigrant families as you had been before you moved?
Right. And certainly by junior high, 7th grade, that you go to school further away and you choose your friends.
What type of child did you like to choose as your friend? Did you find yourself gravitating toward other
I guess I would say predominantly Jewish, but I don't think that was a conscious thing. When I think back, I have friends in junior high, I guess high school, more of a mixture, but maybe still more predominantly Jewish. But again, high schools at that time were high schools of people from the neighborhood, so you weren't choosing where to go to high school.
So you're mentioning mostly Jewish, but do you know whether they were children of survivors?
I'd say by high school, probably not. Most, the people I think back that I was friendly with weren't. Maybe one person was, but the rest weren't.